All right, I have Matt Medeiros with me. Matt runs the Matt Report podcast, the Conductor plugin, has a theme shop. He previously ran his own agency and has since stepped back from the day-to-day of running that agency to take a job with a WordPress hosting company called Pagely, and he's sporting the gear today. Very, very dapper Pagely shirt. So Matt has a lot of experience in a bunch of different areas, and I'm very grateful that he could join us. So thanks, Matt.
I'm grateful to be here, Sam. It's a pleasure and an honor, and welcome to the podcasting world. Again, I should say.
Yeah, thanks. So you have your hands in a lot of different things. So can you just give us a quick timeline of when you started all of these things so we can kind of go from there and figure out your mindset as you started new endeavors?
Sure. So I'll give you hopefully the fastest lifespan of my career that I've ever given on a podcast before. So it starts way back. Been working in the family business. The family business was a car dealership ever since I was growing up, or ever since I was young. Literally starting when I could kind of remember, right? Working there probably when I was like 10 years old, maybe even younger, doing landscaping around the dealership, cleaning cars, washing cars. Vividly, I remember where the dealership was located across from a big mall in our hometown. And I remember going to school, sort of like when the days were nice. It started getting May, June, and when you were still in school, but the weather was getting nice. And I remember my friends being like, "Hey, we were going to the mall and we saw you outside pulling weeds, right? And don't you want to come to the mall with us next weekend?" I'd be like, "I wish I could, but I got to work." So sort of all of that sort of been instilled with me, very young age. Customer service, sales, just getting my hands dirty running a business with my family. Fast forward all the way to college, started working at a local internet service provider, and really got my feet wet with open source from Linux and running their first sort of Linux hosting package systems, using WHM and cPanel. This is like obvious today, but back then it was just coming out. This was software that was just coming out. I ran that whole gig for them, and that company took over another ISP, which had a web development firm, and they were straight up Drupal. And I remember the designer who I befriended was like, "Hey, Matt," I'm still friends with him today. He was like, "Hey, Matt, this Drupal stuff, way too complicated. We need to be on this thing called WordPress." And this was Drupal, like end of Drupal 4, getting into Drupal 5. That's how far back this was. And this is WordPress, I want to say 2.x, certainly 2.x, maybe even 1.x. I can't even remember. So that's when I got into WordPress and learning WordPress. And that company had some management issues. There were 3 owners that were sort of parting ways. And towards the tail end of that, my father was getting out of the car business. He was selling his business. He'd always been passionate about photography. And he had a customer come to him that says, "Hey, we want to build a website with these photos that you just took of our jewelry. Can you do it?" And he turned to me and he said, "Hey, they want a website. You want to do it?" And I was like, "Sure, yeah, why not? Right? Make a couple $100 on the side. I know about this thing called WordPress." And that's when that sort of nugget started the idea for the agency, which ultimately sort of, positioned me right into figuring out how to make an impact in the community. So and how can I get noticed.
What year was that?
I think officially the agency started in 2007.
Gotcha. So that's
it could, I think the rumblings started maybe 2006, end of 2006.
And that origin story is pretty funny. I have a fairly similar origin story of a friend who needed a website, and they said, "Hey, can you do this?" And
sure.
Once you get that first paycheck for building a website, it starts becoming addicting.
Yeah, the whole learning process begins.
Right. So you started your agency, let's say 2007. Then you expanded into themes. Was that your next endeavor?
So I guess a funny story along with that. It's these two stories kind of cross each other. Is I was actually selling when we were using Drupal back in the day. The company that I worked at, we had a lot of real estate customers. Now at the time, I was trying to figure out how I can make, like, I knew how to do shared hosting and cPanel and what open source packages we could, like, I mean, it's weird to say because the stuff didn't exist back then, but it's sort of like email and backup and message boards. Like, these were things like back then that customers were seeking out and actually didn't know about. So I would package these things up and go to people and say, this is like SaaS before SaaS kind of thing. Like, we're just like, hey, look what you can pre-install with cPanel, but here are the ones that we recommend, and that's how we positioned our hosting. But what, in that context, the designer, his name is Chopi, he's from India, great guy, still friends with him today. He was like, hey Matt, we do a lot of real estate customers. We really need to bottle up a way to do real estate sites super fast, so it's not custom all the time. I mean, these are things that people still can't solve a decade later. We were trying to solve back then, and we created a theme called Drupal Real Estate. Well, we called it Drupal Real Estate, and he and I on the side packaged up this theme. With CCK and views, which was a huge part of Drupal back then and still is today. He designed the real estate theme. We integrated some Google Maps stuff, and we bottled that up, packaged that up, and we were selling maybe the world's first Drupal theme. Like, the theme marketplace wasn't even a thing back then. Maybe Studio Press was just a smidgen of an idea at that point.
Plus, you're getting into like productized design, which is
productized design. I mean, it was crazy, and we were selling it for, I think, $150 back then, and it was just flying off the shelf. I mean, but we had no idea what we were getting into, right? And we were using a platform, I believe, called eJunkie back then. And maybe even before that, I might have been manually emailing people the file. I mean, I can't remember. It's been so long. But we were making a few $1,000s a month. Ended up selling the property because we were using the name Drupal in a domain name, which, again, we had no idea, right? We had no idea. And probably Drupal at the time, it wasn't even an Acquia company yet. It was infancy. So anyway, that whole thing sort of snowballed into, my experience with selling digital product and packaging these themes together. So when I spun up the studio, having a theme business and selling a digital product was something like I was like, we're going to do it. I got to figure out how to do it with WordPress, and that was probably at the rise of theme marketplaces at that point, right? Yeah. Things were really igniting at that point.
And that's in like 2008, 2009?
Yeah, I would say 2008. I mean, we were just trying to get our feet planted probably for the first year of 2007. Like, what do we offer? How do we get clients? I mean, the stuff and the price point that we were offering back then is just laughable today. That was also the rise of Facebook, right? This is when people were like, I got to be on Facebook. Or what's this Facebook thing? How can it help my business? I mean, we were doing stupid things like, we would manage your social media, quote unquote, manage your social media for $50 a month, right? These stupid things that we were just trying out. And people were like, here's $50 a month, and make some Facebook posts for me. And we were just trying to figure out the service side of a new digital age that was happening at the time.
Yeah. And so let's fast forward to the release of the Conductor plugin. So was that generated out of a need that you saw in your agency?
Yeah. So the short of that is we just had again, predating page builders, and any page builders that existed at that point were just awful. And certainly we didn't want to give our customers control to a degree that a page builder affords somebody. So we had a half a dozen to a dozen publishers, content creators that, they wanted to promote certain blog posts to the homepage, but they wanted to do it without having us do it, right? Without having them sort of open up a support ticket or pay us to do that. Right. So we built Conductor as a plugin well before it was known as Conductor. We just started implementing it. And, as we were trying to find our way in the product space, we're like, boy, we get this request a lot. We're starting to see page builders crop up, but a lot of people don't like page builders because of the complexity and the overhead of all the code. And then meanwhile, on the back end, we have the rise of the WordPress customizer. And we looked at all these things in motion, and we were like, okay, let's go to the customizer. Let's take this thing we've been using with all these customers for the last year or so and productize it. And, let's see what we can do. Let's see what we can do with this experiment.
And what year is that?
Well,
let me ask this. Was it before or after you created the podcast?
Oh, this was after the podcast.
Okay.
Yeah, so, podcast predates that.
Okay, so then let's talk about your motivation for creating the podcast. So you have this agency, you have a theme shop, you're doing pretty well, and you say to yourself, I want to create a podcast. What was your goal for creating the podcast? Was it to have good conversations with people? Was it to drive more business to your agency? Did you think, okay, this will be good when I release future projects?
Sure. So it was none of that. So I remember going to, I believe it was the 2011 or 2012 WordCamp New York. The New York WordCamp. And so at the time, and I've told this story before, we were actually partnering with 10up before 10up was even 10up. Jake had just started 10up, and my team and his team, we were collaborating on their first TechCrunch redesign, and we were sort of working on that project together. And I ultimately saw, so Jake was in my local WordCamp, and so was Jay Tripp, John James Jacoby, Jesse Friedman, who now works at Jetpack. We were sort of like this motley crew that we all met up over here in Providence, Rhode Island. And I saw how fast Jake's company was growing. And me just getting into the WordPress world, right, and not being a developer inherently, I had to go and find people to hire and develop for me. I realized that, look, I quickly saw how fast of a community presence can bring to somebody for their business. So Jake was well known. He was contributing code. He was an engineer himself, and he was getting these big jobs that I wanted to get too, right? So short of befriending folks like him and working with other agencies, how am I going to get my name out there in the WordPress world? And then it just sort of dawned on me one day when I was at the WordCamp New York, and it was opening keynote, and I think it was oh man, I'm going to forget his name. He works for the government now, but he was working for Andrew Nason. So he was sort of like walking down the aisle, and of course, you know how it is in sort of the WordPress celebrity world. People are like, oh, it's Andrew Nason, and I didn't know who he was. So I was just like, man, it's crazy. Like, I see so many people looking up to these other people. They're afraid to go talk to them. Why don't they just go talk to them? I hear people like, oh, I'd love to ask them about this. Maybe I'll catch them after the keynote. And it's like, well, maybe that's what I'll do. I'll just highlight people in the community to sort of interview them. And I was only really thinking a blog at the time. Like, I wasn't even thinking podcast. And then I was a huge fan, a Mixergy fan, which is another podcast, more traditional VC and Silicon Valley startups. And I was like, maybe I'll just try to be like the Mixergy of WordPress. And that's when it sort of literally my first interview was Jesse Friedman, who I knew in the WordPress space. And then literally every other interview after was just people I just saw on Twitter. I didn't know them. I was just like, hey. Or second one was Brian Castle, who I was kind of friends with. But then third, fourth, and so on were just people I just knocking on doors like, hey, want to be on this podcast that I'm creating? Yeah. And people were like, yeah, that's it. And that's sort of where it all started to avalanche.
But you said you were deliberately trying to raise your profile in order to maybe be in the position to get these larger projects. Yeah.
It really was. It was more of we had the rise of podcasts and information through podcasts, right? So I was learning from Mixergy, right? I was learning like everything from legal to accounting to SaaS metrics, and again, I think the whole industry was learning at that point. So I was doing it much more from a learning perspective. Like, I'll have these conversations with people, and I guess sort of greedily getting some free knowledge. Right. I wasn't sure I knew that the spinoff was maybe it'll raise my profile, and I will certainly build a network, which is important. But for me, it was like, hey, I can learn from these people, and I can have some content to share at the same time. For me, it was much more, how can I learn from all these other people who are doing things that I want to do? Running an agency, being better freelancers, writing better contracts. I want to know how to do all this stuff, so I'll just spin up conversations to have that. And that was the true ambition.
Yeah, that kind of goes along with, I watched a video of yours recently. It said the WordPress community is not for the taking, it's for the giving. And so that's kind of along the same lines. And in that video, you're talking about showing up being like one of the key parts of kind of being an influencer in the community, being a productive member of the community. Do you think that is like, do you think that's the most important factor, is just being there, releasing more content, giving as much as possible? Or do you think that it has to be combined with a very effective strategy? Like, can you just show up? Is showing up enough, or does it need to be combined with a very effective strategy?
It depends. I mean, I think some people can show up and do a really good job. And I think some people have to sit down and formulate a strategy, but that can be to their demise, where it's too much of a strategy and there's not enough personality in it. I think everybody should start a podcast, but I don't think everyone can do a podcast. I think it's a great effective tool, and it's important that people find what their cause is, and how do they align that with who they are. For example, like, I really see myself as a blue collar digital worker, right? If that's such a thing, right? If that's such a thing. I am really still trying to swing for the fences, and I do all of this without any regard of, I'm transparency, right? So I'm putting everything out there as much as I possibly can, and telling people when I fail, how I fail, and how I'm learning along the way. I'm certainly not the sharpest tool in the shed, but I'm just trying to do this stuff for everybody else to kind of learn from too. I'm learning, and I'm hoping other people are learning from it too. And in the same sense of how I am critical of WordPress, WordPress the software, WordPress the community, WordPress the organization, or Automatic the organization. I'm critical because I feel like there are a lot of people like me that are out there who might not voice their opinion, don't know how to voice their opinion, don't know how to sort of corral up an audience around a particular subject. So yeah, man, I mean, I sort of look at it like blue collar digital worker, and that's sort of my stance now. And hopefully it's all for good reason and betterment of the community.
Yeah. So how did you figure out what was working? Like I think also in the video you say that you've tried a lot of things. You release a lot of content. You have a YouTube channel, and I don't want to put you on blast, but you haven't posted anything in 5 months. Does that mean that you've figured out that that channel isn't really working? Like, what does it look like when a channel is working versus a channel you just haven't hit the channel for long enough to make it work?
Yeah, there's a lot there. There's a lot of thoughts of thread to unpack. One is, I think that all of us, entrepreneurs, business builders, we all are subject to the shiny syndrome, the shiny object syndrome, I should say. Whereas the passion that we have, most of us anyway, is we love to build things, we love to create. At least I know I do. So I find great excitement in building something, the thought process, thinking about it, forgetting about it purposely, and then seeing if it comes back into my mind is a great way for me to say that I should pursue a particular thing. I get really energized about building something and launching it. The part that sucks is the sustaining that, marketing it, and keeping it going and iterating on it. Because it becomes such for most people anyway, a product or a project is very personal, and it's hard to, you get these great ideas and you launch it out there, and people just don't like it for whatever reason. I do a lot because it's the only way I know how. There's a lot of people that, again, like I said before, they are great at strategy. They're great at systems, and they can sit down and really focus on these things. But that's not me. I mean, my schedule, and I think a lot of people's schedules are life, friends, family. I have a young son now. I have a second on the way. Like, I work in these pockets of time, and one would say, well, that's exactly why you should systemize things. I can't. It's just, for me, it's like I'm much more on the creative side, and when I am inspired to work, like I can be heads down for 5 hours just working, and other times I have to go at different cadences.
Right.
I also feel like I predate a lot, not predate, but I can sort of forecast a lot of where things are going to my own detriment, where I'll launch something and not give it enough time because I was just too, there's a whole like theory out there. I forget the name of it, but it's like, if you're first to market, sometimes it's a bad thing if you're first to market because it hasn't been sort of adopted widely yet, that kind of thing. I mean, again, before we got into doing themes, we were building our own CMS while we were selling WordPress websites. And this was because we were selling WordPress websites and we were seeing customers be like, wow, this stuff is way too confusing. Don't know how to use this. I don't need all this stuff. And we didn't want to support it. And we wanted something super cost effective. We built a CMS that only could allow you to create up to 5 pages on this little microsite. It was called JPages. It allowed somebody to spin up we made a dozen super basic HTML templates. The customer could only make up to 5 pages in their own editor, GUI editor. And they just add pages. It could be a contact page, a gallery page, or a text page. That's it. That's all they wanted. And we were selling it for $10 a month. People would come in. There was a sign-up fee. It was like a $200 or $500 sign-up fee. They'd sit down with us. We'd spin up the site. We did case studies at the local university for people to test out. But we didn't give it enough time. I mean, it could be a Wix today, right? If we had spent enough time with it.
Right. So why didn't you give that enough time? What made you move away from that? And like similarly, how come you haven't given your YouTube channel the same consistency that you've given your podcasting? And do you think if you did that with YouTube, you would have you would grow your YouTube channel and how are you making the value judgment between all of these different things?
So the value judgment was easier on the agency side because I could see that was a standalone SaaS. Let's use that as an example. The website builder. So that's a standalone SaaS. Again, this is before SaaS was even being really thrown around as like a popular phrase. We would get agency work. And again, at the time, if we got like a $20,000 contract, that was massive for us, right? It's a huge cash injection, but it's also all hands on deck for something like that, which we still suffer with today. We get a big contract in, it sort of detracts away from the time of conductor. It's no different than what that was back then. It was just balancing the time. But we just knew that, hey, this $20,000 contract is going to move us way farther, in terms of staying alive than this $10 a month, JPages account. On the YouTube side, we were actually, again, sort of like talking about like being too far ahead of the curve on the studio side. At one point, I had 3 different shows that I recorded weekly for YouTube. I'd have to go back to see like when the first video was that we launched, but might be 2010, 11. This is like right when 1080p like high definition is coming out, and we're using $9,000 Nikon cameras that my father uses for photography to film video, and massive files. I mean, it's all laughable now because our iPhones are doing this stuff without even flinching. But we were using like these Nikon cameras, big lenses, lighting, all of this stuff in our studio to record like these 10, 15-minute videos covering SEO and WordPress industry news and WordPress comparisons, that kind of thing. And we were doing that week after week. I had an intern editing the videos, Now, the YouTube channel that you are talking about, yes, there's been a delay, those 4 to 5 months, but that is slightly different. It's more of a creative thing. I enjoyed building that channel to where it was with your typical WordPress tutorial resource channel. Mm-hmm. And so here's a fun fact about anybody who's thinking about doing YouTube, which I think is a tremendous opportunity. I worked my butt off. for however many videos are up right now, maybe 100 every week or every couple of weeks, put up a couple videos, and grew that channel to, from 0 to, at the time when I sort of stopped, which is primarily when I started Pagely, just because I had a time constriction, maybe 2,000 subscribers to that channel. Now it's at 4,500. So I've effectively doubled my subscriber count by doing nothing for 4 to 5 months, which is a testament to either, evergreen content and YouTube as a platform itself, so on and so forth. But I was just burnt out from the creative side of it. I have plans to bring that channel back. I just want to do something better. Mm-hmm. Right? I just don't want to do the same thing. This goes back to what you were saying before of like people should sit down, set a goal, and sort of strategize and all this stuff. And that's great. There's plenty of YouTubers that do that, especially in the WordPress space. But my God, it is how many page builders are you going to review? How many page builders are you going to endorse simply for affiliate, commissions, and hosts and all of these things, right? Slider plugins. And it's just too noisy for me. Mm-hmm. I want to be able to sit back and create a video that creates more story, more engagement, which, it's tough in the WordPress space. I study a lot of like celebrities, how they start and where they come from. I mean, the HBO series of Dr. Dre, and his partner who sold Beats audio to Apple is a ridiculously phenomenal story. You see folks come, it takes decades for somebody's character to unravel, but they start out as a DJ at like a teen club, which was Dr. Dre, to like this infamous rapper, which people were just like, what is this guy ever going to do in terms of building a business, right? He's just a rapper, that kind of thing. To see where he has gone to sell a audio company for $1 billion to one of the highest regarded companies in the world, in the history of the world, is just amazing. It's mind-boggling. And I study celebrities and how they grow, how extreme they go. And I study video gamers and streamers, right? And how they create content on YouTube is so engaging. Half of it has to do with the video game that they're playing, because that's a huge piece of content that is just, depending on the game, can be super engaging and fun and just interactive. And then their personality. And I'm trying to figure out ways that I can bring that same thing to the boring world of WordPress, right? Like, how can I marry this kind of thing with our sort of lackluster, world of CMS, right? Yeah. How many people care about that? And that's sort of my challenge in my head.
That's interesting so on the one hand, you're saying that you need to show up, but in the case of your YouTube channel, you're kind of taking time off to marinate and strategize. Do you feel like you're missing opportunity? I mean, obviously it's not too bad since your subscriber count is still growing, even in the absence of new content. But do you feel like you're missing out on even more growth by not posting consistently while you're kind of formulating this new plan that you can kind of grow into?
Yeah, I mean, a little bit, and it's why it's still on the back of my mind. I mean, when I approached that, again, I was approaching it from a very traditional, like, I'm going to do tutorial videos. It's going to be SEO driven. It's going to be affiliate link driven. And I guess where if you spent that time doing that, it's one of those things like, hey, if you stop eating pizza every day for 6 months, you're going to lose a ton of weight. And then you wait 6 months, you're still eating the pizza. You're like, damn, if I stop eating that pizza, I'd be so much skinnier right now. It's the same sort of thing with that stuff. But again, had I continued with it, I might just be burnt out from it, right? And I might never even get to the point where I just want to create something better. I feel like WordPress media deserves something better. I'll probably get lashed out about that thing, but how many more listicle articles can we get? Right. People have been saying that for 2 years and we still get them. So I know that they work, right? In terms of SEO and affiliate juice, but man, it's like getting a corporate job, and working in a cubicle. It's not for me.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's an important point that, if you're getting burnt out, it's better to take a step back and kind of refresh yourself than keep trudging forward and churning out content that you don't really believe in. So
yeah,
show up as long as you have something to show up for, I guess. Is the modification of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're hitting the half-hour mark, but I want to talk a little bit about how you feel like growing your profile has helped your businesses, especially your agency and your plugin businesses. So let's start. Like, has the podcast fed your agency?
Yes. So, I've never tracked it, and I've said this before for the last couple of years when this question comes up, either in interviews or if I'm getting interviewed like this. Hundreds of thousands of dollars have come specifically from the podcast and agency work. From legit sales where people said, I just happened to stumble across your show because I was looking something up and I want to hire your agency for WordPress work, or because I met another agency at a WordCamp, or I had somebody on the show and they were like, hey, we got this project we're not going to take on. Can your team take it on? Mm-hmm. Or just pure influence on Twitter from people finding the stuff that I share and saying, boy, you're knowledgeable in WordPress. Let me just hire you. And this is why I love podcasting so much and sort of organic content and building an audience, is because folks are able to position themselves away from their competition, because let me tell you something. It's great when you have the highest rated WordPress podcast on iTunes, when you're on the phone call with somebody and they say, why do you want to hire? Why should we hire you? Like, what do you know about WordPress that XYZ doesn't know? And I can point towards 100 5-star reviews on iTunes that no one else can. And I say, look, hundreds of episodes of me talking about WordPress critically and exploratory. Here are all the reviews. I've been doing it for 3-4 years, 5 years now, probably 5 years now. And I don't know how much more social proof you want. And then, of course, my portfolio and customer referrals. So it's a huge leg up over competition.
Right. I think people would think about the lead gen aspect of it, but what you're saying is it's a lot more than just the lead gen. It helps in
it's
sales.
The social proof,
right?
Yeah, it's a social proof in those negotiations. Ultimately, no one's signing a deal, right? You go to an agency website and they say, sign up here for your website. What's your budget? $20,000. No one's signing up for $20,000, swiping their credit card and saying, hey, go build my website for me, right? You're going to have a negotiation, sales call. And if you can position yourself away from your competition, it doesn't have to be a podcast. It can be a YouTube channel. It could be a series of white papers that you've written. Anything that is sort of showing your personality, to let the customer decide, do you want to work with me? Right. I mean, again, here's a million hours of me blabbing about WordPress. If you don't like it, I don't know what to tell you. This is what you're going to get when you're dealing with me. Right. So, everybody knows everything.
Yeah. And what about the Conductor plugin? Do you think that the podcast has helped there? And do you think that it's helped as much, if so?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Again, another fault of my own, because I when we were running the car dealership, there's two important stories. It was a family-owned dealership. We're in a small town, about an hour south of Boston, and it's family-owned. My grandfather started it, and we had employees working with us all of their lives, literally all of their lives, 30, 40 years when we sold the business. They had never had another job other than with us, right? So they were family, and that's why customers bought from us. But when customers would come in and they'd be like, hey, I can go up to Herb Chambers in Boston and save myself $100. They're going to sell it to me for $100 less. What are you going to do? Right? And I'm like, well, where do you live? And they're like, oh, we live right down the street. Okay. Where are you going to service your car? Oh, right here. Okay. So is it worth it to you to take away another $100 from us and drive 50 miles and spend that in gas, or 100 miles both ways, right, and spend that in gas? That sort of, value of just sort of, not being a high volume pressured dealership. And the way I run the podcast is sort of the same way. And this is where I'm leading to this, is the mistakes that I make is I don't really promote my stuff that much on my own podcast.
I've noticed that.
And it's really because hopefully it's a testament, and I'm sort of slapping myself every day because it's like, man, you have this platform to push it, but it's also like, I'm not doing it for that. I'm hoping it's like this. I'm hoping it's like this, this spin-off effect is people will look at my products, but it's also because like, man, I do care about the WordPress space as critical as I am on, as I am on Jetpack and Automatic and all that stuff. I have good intentions. And really the show is hopefully about the people listening are going to elevate their game a little bit. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I'm sure it does. It definitely, allows me to talk to other plugin developers and get some feedback with our own stuff. And certainly people know me when they buy my product. I mean, mostly everybody who buys the Conductor product at this point, if they open up a support ticket, it always starts with, "Hey, Matt." So I mean, at least I know that people are connecting the dots.
Right. If you were going to promote your plugin more on your podcast, how would you do it? Would you just be kind of mentioning it in conversation, or are you thinking of just having like a little disclaimer at the end saying that this is something that you offer?
Yeah, it would probably be more traditional ad. I mean, I would sort of maybe weave it in, but again, no strategy behind it. If it comes up, it comes up. But if I do move to something where it's more of a prominent push, which I might do when we have a couple features coming out pretty soon, which I think will make it more, just interesting to folks. I might move to a more traditional, like ad spot kind of thing, quick read kind of thing.
Cool. Last question, and we can touch on this briefly. I've been recently following you a little bit more on Twitter. Mm-hmm. Do you think that that's your most effective social channel? Putting YouTube aside, so like among LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, do you think that Twitter is the most effective?
Yeah, it has been. It's always been my favorite social network. I don't really care for the 280 characters. They could have came up with something a little bit more innovative, given the technology that they have. But yeah, I love Twitter. Direct, fast-paced. Typically not inundated with cat photos. So yeah, I would say that from connecting with people, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Twitter's the best for me.
Well, short and sweet. All right, thanks a lot, Matt. Thanks for joining us, and
no problem, Sam.
Hopefully we'll talk again soon.
Absolutely.